very special guest. I've been looking forward to this guest. Thomas Sowell is a renowned economist. He's a Hoover Fellow. He's a thinker, and he's author of Intellectuals and Society. Dr. Sowell received his bachelor's degree from Harvard University, a master's degree from Columbia University, and in 1968, he earned his doctorate degree in economics from the University of Chicago. Dr. Sowell, thanks for being on the George Jarkesy Show.
Well, thanks for having me.
I got to tell you, I've been excited all month about it. So, listen, you know, in light of this information that's come out today between the president and Derek Bell, could you enlighten us a little bit and our listeners on who Derek Bell was?
Oh, my heavens. It's a sad story, I think. Derek Bell was a black civil rights lawyer. He had some very sensible ideas at one time, one of which was that the integration crusade in itself in the schools was not going to do very much, and it was barking up the wrong tree. That was what interested me in him. However, in later times, he went off the deep end. He was something called critical race theory. The best I can understand is that all problems are white folks' fault. But it got more weird than that. My own take on him is that he was a man put in the wrong place. That is, he was. I'm sure had he been at some school other than Stanford or Harvard, he would have been a valued member of the law school faculty and could have taught intelligent courses. But again, he's in with the top minds, legal minds in the country. And he was just not up to that level. And so his choices were to be, the poor relation or to come up with his own little shtick and become somebody significant. And he went for the latter.
Well, you know, in looking at your book as kind of a follow-on to that thought about Harvard, and, you know, what role have intellectuals played as it regards to racial and ethnic relations here in the United States?
Oh my God, they've played pretty much the same role they've played in other countries around the world, which is to say they have made matters enormously worse. They've done it in two different ways in the United States. Back 100 years ago, during the progressive era in the early 20th century, they made matters worse because they were the biggest promoters of the idea that those groups that were not achieving as much as others were just genetically inferior, would always be genetically inferior, and therefore they had to be prevented from breeding by various methods. And this, I guess, the culminating book in that was in 1916, a book called The Passing of the Great Race, which unfortunately was translated into various languages, including German. Hitler read it and called it his Bible, and 6 million people got murdered as a result. In the later 20th century, they go to the other end of the spectrum, and now all the differences among groups and outcomes are due to maltreatment by others. They don't want to hear any other possible explanation, and you're a racist if you offer any other explanation. So they've polarized societies. They turn the prosperous people against the poor people in the early 20th century, and they try and turn the poor against the more prosperous in the later 20th century.
You know, one concept that you talked about in your book was that that a person could only know so much, and yet our society has placed a very high regard on intellectuals over a broad range of thought and of intelligence. Can you touch on that a little bit, or talk about that?
Yeah, my belief is that the most knowledgeable person on earth does not have even 1% of all the knowledge on earth. And so insofar as we allow people to take over other people's decisions, you can expect to have poorer decisions. I think the classic example is economic central planning. Now, the central planners usually had more education than other people. They had more data available. They had probably higher IQs, and so on. And yet, all around the world, as the 20th century went on, central planning was abandoned as a failure, not just by conservatives, by communist and socialist governments abandoned it because it just wasn't working. Now, if it's true that the people who are brighter and so forth, the brightest and the best, can make our decisions for us, central planning should have been a great success. but ordinary people making their own adjustments in light of their own knowledge of their own specific circumstances and desires, almost invariably produced higher growth rates, eliminated more poverty, and so on.
Dr. Sowell, this is Dwayne DeLotte, the co-host of the show. Really a big honor to have you on. I have to say, reading Intellectual Society has been a real mind-opener for me. It was interesting reading, or just sitting there rereading some of it yesterday. You point out that even though typically we think on the left, the farthest left you can get would be communism, and the farthest right you could get would be fascism. But you point out in the end, they're pretty much the same. Can you elaborate for our listeners on that?
Well, they were the same, and in fact, in the 1920s, that was recognized widely by people across the ideological spectrum. I mean, Mussolini was a former socialist who decided that what you needed was socialism wedded to dictatorship. Hitler, the Nazis, really the contraction for the National German Socialist Workers' Party. So Hitler was a socialist as well, and also believed in dictatorship. Now, during the 20s, everybody recognized that. People on the left called these people part of the left. In the 30s, when Hitler and Mussolini began attacking other countries, then, of course, they became pariahs. And now people on the left said that these are people on the right. And so they dumped them over onto the right. And, in fact, the whole dichotomy of left and right is meaningless in a sense. That is, there is no coherent agenda or vision on the right. All the people who oppose the left are referred to as the right. That would include libertarians, military hunters, theocracies, whatever.
Dr. Sowell, let me ask you one follow-up question, just as we were talking about the situation with the president. What do you make of the president's embrace of Jeremiah Wright or of Dr. Derek Bell? What do you make of that as far as the formation of his character?
Well, if that was a lone thing, maybe it would be explainable in the way he's explained. It's not the lone thing. As this thing with Derek Bell shows, he has always allied himself with people who polarize society, who think that those who are less fortunate should be spending their time resenting those who are more fortunate, instead of themselves developing the same abilities so that they can become more fortunate. So that's his take on the world. I strongly suspect it affects his view of international relations as well. That, Israel, after all, is vastly more successful than the other countries of the Middle East. And so they really play this role of people who are to be resented, just as more affluent people at home are.
Well, Dr. Sowell, listen, I want to first of all thank you so much for being on the George Jarkesy show today, and thank you for your articles. I read them all the time at townhall.com. I find them very insightful. And you truly are a leader in our country, and I think that Americans that are doing their homework should be reading the pieces you're putting out and should be reading your book, Intellectuals and Society. And as Dwayne said, it really it gave us some new thoughts and some new concepts that we really hadn't touched on before. And so I can say that it's changed my thoughts a little bit and altered it and give me some new ideas. So you can buy the book Intellectuals and Society on our bookstore at georgejarkesy.com. And Dr. Sowell, is there something, a website or something that you would like listeners to maybe follow you on?
On my own website, www.tsowell.com.